All right, let's get started. I'm Lyle Hanna with the Hanna Resource Group. Welcome this morning to Crisis Management for COVID-19 Phase 17. We've been at this for 20 weeks now. We took a little hiatus there, but too much going on too fast, so we're back on the road. And today we're going to have a great update on a congressional update on what's going on in Washington. And then we've got back to the legal update. Jim's going to be helping us through that. And we promised talking about back to school. So quite a few things have happened over the past week, so we're going to be covering that. Of course, Jim Morris is with us, our attorney, who's got an MPA also. So he's kind of right on top of this stuff and has really kept up with it. I get some great comments about him afterwards. Boy, he is raw and direct, and I love it, is what most of them say. And Jim, we appreciate your being with us. We also have a very special guest today, Mary Rosado. Mary is the Chief of Staff for Representative Andy Barr. And you know that if you've been with us all along, you know Andy is just being terrific. He has been on 4 different times and really been a super resource for us. Of course, he's had an unfortunate situation with his wife, and we all hold him in our prayers for that. So he suggested that Mary could give us an update. So she is the Chief of Staff in his office. You know, he is on the Financial Services Committee. He's on the House Veterans Affairs Committee. And he's part of the leadership of the House Republican whip team. So she is the one that stands in for him and works, keeps him going in the back, I'm sure, taking care of things for him. And she's really up to speed on what's going on. So she's going to be speaking with us today. Before she worked for Representative Barr, she was a healthcare and policy expert for several Fortune 100 companies. She was also the staff director of the U.S. House Committee on Small Business, so she can relate to what we are up against. And I think that's great. She has a law degree from St. Louis, Missouri, and an undergraduate degree from that same institution, so she's a neighbor of ours geographically. Mary, I'll get you started in just a minute. A couple more things to cover real quickly before I turn it over to you. We are going to do the Washington update first, then we're going to talk about back to school, then we're going to do a full legal update. I've got a fun little slide. You know, people keep asking, well, what about these masks? So this came out this weekend. You may have seen it. I think it's really helpful because I believe the mask, you know, the doctor we had on 2 weeks ago said, number one, 3 things we can do: wear masks, distance yourself properly, and keep things clean. Keep your surface clean, face, hands, and all that stuff. And I thought this was a really great description. Look at the top of that. If you're with somebody and that's a 3% distance and they sneeze, so the person on the left is doing the action mainly, they're sneezing, 90% chance of transmission if you're that close in that situation with no mask. If you're wearing a mask, you're within 3 feet, 30% chance. If the other person, the sneezer, is wearing a mask, look at that. It blocks most of it, only a 5% risk. And if you're both wearing a mask, 1.5% risk. So clearly these are just examples, but it really works. And then look at that. If you're 6 feet apart, there's almost no risk. So that 3-foot thing was a great idea to start with. 6 feet makes a lot more sense. Even in the workplace, when you're working with others, you just don't know who has it and who doesn't. So I thought that was a fun slide, and we'll make it available to you. Let's step up to the real show here. And let me just say another word about Mary. Mary, we're so glad to have you here today. She's working from home like so many of us. Tell us what in the world is going on in Washington.
Well, thank you so much, Lyle. I'm pleased to be here today. I'm going to try to do a little reading of the tea leaves for y'all. And what's going on. As you may know, we are looking at a COVID CARES 2.0 package, or 4.0, or whatever you want to call it. The House passed a bill earlier in May that basically was had everything on the table in it, and that's really a non-starter with the Senate. But the Senate is looking at putting together a package and perhaps putting it out today. And negotiating, I think, will start from there. The leverage point is the fact that the additional federal unemployment insurance of $600 a week expires this week. At the end of the last payment was this past Saturday because of how states do things. So that is really the inflection point. That additional relief is needed and additional unemployment insurance. So that's what's driving it. I personally think that I'll get into the politics of it in a few minutes, but basically what the Senate Republicans have talked about is that we've come a long way since the CARES Act passed in March, but there's still, there's a need. We're not out of the crisis. And so if something can come together on COVID relief, it will be, in my opinion, this week, next week, or even maybe the week after. The Senate Republicans and the White House are talking about kids, jobs, and healthcare. So there is a very big red line on liability reform, and I know you guys are going to be talking about that a little bit after me. Let me tell you where the Republicans' heads are. The proposal is to basically try to tap down on frivolous lawsuits in 4 main buckets. First of all, the first one is personal injury liability limitations for COVID. And I would assume that's following, expansion of the PrEP Act. The PrEP Act allows for, if you follow the best available guidelines, like that CDC has put out, you cannot be sued. And product liability protections. They're also looking at labor and employment protections. Again, following guidelines. This does not create covering, they want to cover all businesses, schools, churches, nonprofits, and individuals that operate in interstate commerce. They're looking at creating a new cause of action in federal court for personal injury claims. So federalizing it with respect to this pandemic. So the idea is that you could bring a case in federal or state court, but you could move to federal court at the defendant's choice, and looking at basically preempting state laws with less protections for the defendant. You would have to show gross negligent or willful misconduct in order to succeed. And, it would retroactive and run through several years. So as this peters out, and it would have a sunset. So that's where the Republicans' heads are with respect to liability. It's going to, broad and having to show gross negligence. Broad relief and broad class of people that will be covered, all businesses. So now on the finance piece of what the Republicans are going to be putting forward, they're looking at basically a $1 trillion plan. It focused on getting people back to work. And that's a very big point of contention, which is the $600 additional federal employment. I think that if you've watched any of the Sunday shows or whatnot, they're looking at scaling that back to income replacement of about 70% as a way so an additional relief in addition to unemployment benefits that the state provides, but also not paying people to, shall we say, work, to not work, basically, where they make more money staying home on unemployment. I know that our office has heard a lot from small businesses that are unable to hire people and not just small businesses, because they make more money being not working. So that is a very big concern. They are looking also at an employment tax credit for the employer. Also looking at some of these things of how the federal government can assist businesses in procuring PPE. Looking at an additional round of economic impact statements. $1,200 is the number being thrown out. I've heard at one point income testing it down to $40,000, although Secretary Mnuchin and Chief of Staff Mark Meadows were talking about probably the same $75,000 limit that was last time. I'm trying to think. Also, they are looking at providing some assistance to nonprofits and state and local governments that have additional unemployment costs. Also looking at, there'll be some on the healthcare front, holding Medicare premium, Part B premiums for seniors at what I call a flat level, so there's no spike there. They want more provider relief, potentially. They also want to extend the period when money can be used, so it doesn't, and expand the end date to 90 days after a state government's fiscal year, to allow them to also more flexibility in state and local government. The $100 billion that was in the first package coronavirus, COVID related things, this would give them more flexibility to replace their revenues shortfalls. For small businesses, they're looking at on the table an additional round of PPP. Perhaps I heard this weekend they may lower that to 300 versus 500 employees, and they also may reduce the amount that needs to be spent on wages versus overhead, and add supplier costs and property damage from recent rioting to overhead. They're also looking, very much on the table of 501c6s could be included in that. Those are those associations like chambers of commerce, etc. So that's very much in the making. Congressman Barr also has a streamlined loan forgiveness. It's like a one-page proposal that you just fill out this, and a streamline for very small businesses that we are told that will be included. And then there will be money for testing, vaccine distribution. And then also with respect to you've probably heard in the news that there's about there is an agreement on $105 billion for student, like I would say schools is what, and that has to do with, I would say that, that's still very much, I think the number is agreed on, but there's still very much in flux on how much will go to actual students versus schools, etc. So what we're hearing is about $5 billion to go to like a governor's fund, which can be used flexibly, $29 billion to higher ed, and $70 billion, the bulk of it, going to the K through 12. $10 billion of that goes to private schools. $30 billion is distributed through the states within 15 days and must be sent to the state school districts. There's a lot of frustration that some of this money has not been sent out at the federal level. And the remaining $30 billion only available to schools that physically open. So, I mean, there is I think that's, where the Republican and the Senate heads are, and now, but I would also say that anything that gets ultimately done and passed will be, and necessarily will be bipartisan. So it was very much a negotiation perspective, because it would need 60 votes in the Senate to pass. And that means that it needs bipartisan support. I don't suspect this will come together this week. I'm not even sure if it would come together next week, but I do think that something will come together ultimately in August. And I think that this is what we're looking at. I think it's going to have school money. I think it's going to have liability protections, and I think it's going to have more PPP and small business assistance. So I will stop there. It becomes a horse trading. If I were a guessing person, I would say maybe the week of August 10th, we might get a final deal, and they'll bring the members back to vote for it. So, and I think that any deal that they get is likely to have broad bipartisan support at the end of the day. So I will stop there.
Mary, that was very helpful. It sounds like there certainly is a lot going on. And I guess we would all say 3 cheers, work as fast as you can.
Yes. Okay. And I'm happy to take questions. I see in one of the questions it says, did you say that schools get assistance only if they have in-person classes? No, I did not say that. I said that there will be probably some additional of the $105 billion, a piece of that will be an incentive to schools to, so some of that, but no, not only if you come back in person. You know, obviously, if you don't come back in person, you don't need money for PPE, right? But I do know that they are trying to encourage schools to open cautiously. I speak
Mary,
as a mother myself. You know, I want, you know, our schools put together a plan. It's cautious, it's, you know, but they're opening. So, and I think it's a good plan. So I think they want to.
Mary, I wanted, on a personal note, if you could pass on to Congressman Barr our thoughts and prayers for him and his family. He's been very good to this webinar and to showing up and explaining these things. And we certainly miss him, but we understand where he needs to be right now. I just personally wanted to share that and have you pass that on to him, please.
I'd be happy to. And I want to tell you the overwhelming outreach has been great. I would say that it has sustained him. So thank you. He is doing some official work. You know, he is, frankly, the whole PPP loan forgiveness, streamlining of the application was literally his baby. And he's still been doing what he needs to do to keep working on that at a really high level, as is the staff. So he's not totally, but he is spending some more time, obviously, with his girls. So
yes, yeah.
Great. Anything else, Allison? Looks like not much has come in. I want to encourage people to go ahead and put things in those chat boxes, because we've got a really talented person on the phone here. And if you have a question, now's the time to ask. All right. Mary, we really appreciate your taking time.
my pleasure.
We talked about this over the weekend, and everybody kept thinking, oh, something's going to happen, it's going to happen. And so I know you had to stay alert and watch things, and you've given us a good update. We appreciate it, and we'll welcome you back sometime in the future.
Yeah, so I mean, as I said, everything changes. Give it 5 minutes. So that's why I'm kind of joking that you recorded this. By the time you put it up on your web, everything will have changed. Well, thank you, and thank you for all the good work you do in terms of getting information out to people.
You bet. You have a great week. And we're going to turn it over now to Jim, and he's got some legal update to cover. And I think he's going to start out with some facts and figures for us. So Jim, we're delighted to have you back. Hope you're having a great week, and let's see what we can do here. Jump in.
All right, let's jump right into it. So one of the things she said that I wanted to reemphasize is I literally, if you saw me looking off to the side, literally was making changes to one of the slides because as we started this, there's a brand new update on what they're trying to do with the stimulus package, and so I'm literally adding slides, changing slides as we go. I waited until, Lyle, 15 minutes before we started to send the slides out because I've been changing them all morning because the anneouncement coming this morning. I don't have anything else.
Yeah, we heard early this morning. It was coming out at 8:30, right? So we were all
right.
Waiting. Nothing at 8:30, 10:30 still nothing. So Jim, we're keeping on top of it, and we'll give you everything we have now. And if more comes in, we'll have more for you next week.
That's right. So I wanted to do a couple of things with some facts and figures, and I put these in backwards. So actually, let me see if I can drag and drop and move. No, I'm not going to do it. So I'll just go backwards and you guys can deal with it. So there are a couple of slides I thought were interesting that I wanted to put up so that you could see kind of the way things are going. This does not necessarily represent, when it has these exploding circles, that these are multiple areas on top of one another. These are actually the states, individual states, and the size of the circle is how big the epidemic is in that particular state, and Kentucky is one of the smallest right here where my bullet point is. All around it are some larger ones: Ohio, Illinois, this is New York, California, and Florida, Texas. Part of that is the size of the state itself. Part of it is the age of the people in the state. But I also thought that these figures were important to share. Fayette County has 2,381. Each of the counties were there. I apologize to those in Jefferson and so on. I just didn't have enough slide space. Kentucky has 27,000 confirmed cases, 700 deaths, 7,400 recovered. I think the recovery is probably a little bit higher than that, and part of that is the way that they're now doing testing and non-testing, and we're going to get into that in a second as well. United States cases, I didn't cover the global, but I thought I would just put these up here. It just shows the impact of everything truly going on. This is as of this morning at 10 o'clock. Slides for Kentucky, we've talked about squashing or quashing the curve. They've talked about that among various ways. This is the literal per day, and you can see the gradual incline, which may be why the governor backed off the 50 and 100 and went back to 10. It started to go up. Here's the overall cumulative cases, which is not the bell curve you want. But then if you look at it compared to California and Florida, for example, you'll note how ours is, even though this over here shows how much of an increase it is from when we got the first 100, which is what that is, and this is as well. Overall, our numbers are incredibly low compared to the other states, so that's to be commended. So I just want to share those with you. All right, the legislative aid. You heard her talk about this a little bit, and you've heard me talk about it in the past. So the House and the Senate, two different bodies, two different ways to have bills come through. The House had the $3-point-something trillion that was up on top of the $3 trillion FFCRA and the CARES Act that they wanted to pass. It had a lot of things in it that didn't have anything to do with COVID-19, so it's gotten zero play in the Senate. It's been sitting there since May. It's been dead on arrival in the Senate. The Senate had a supported $1 trillion additional aid package that was to be announced last Friday, but they did a straw poll behind closed doors of other senators in on the Republican caucus, and they had some issues. So because that failed or was too close to the line to get enough votes, it caused the delay that we're into today. So last Monday, I had predicted that we would have an announced, if not passed, package that we would be able to break down for you. We don't have that. We do have quite a bit of additional things going on, but it's not final. So everything you're hearing on the next two slides are my understanding, the tea leaves, inside information from certain offices, and other things that I can talk about that may or may not happen, but are certainly in the works. So the Senate bill, the rumors of inclusion, these are pretty good rumors. There is a continuation of unemployment benefits, but the unemployment benefits will not be $600. They're talking about making it the maximum of $400 or $450, I've heard both, or 70% of your actual income, whichever is less, and they're talking about combining federal and state to come up with 70% of your income so that you don't have a disincentive to work. For all of you that are in real business and you need people to come back to work, you've already dealt with this probably 100 times where people are saying, you know, hey, I really don't want to come back. Can you just keep me on unemployment? I'm making more money at home. We ran the numbers for you once before, and the actual pay at home, it's $1,152 a week. If you multiply that out, you're basically, if you're a full-time, that's the maximum. Full-time, you're making like $75,000 a year. That's hard to match if you're an employer. So, and then if you're making less than that, the $600 a week is much more than any hourly wage that you'll ever bring in. So 70% of actual income, around $400 a week additional to the state so that they can get people back to work, but that's a maximum, not a flat across the board. They're also talking about incentive pay for employees to return to work, money added to your paycheck. The amount I've heard is the $450 a week, and that one I have heard could be a flat amount added to a weekly paycheck, so that if you are making $12 an hour, $450 extra to go back to work if you're working full-time means that you would want to do that. $1,200 stimulus checks, still $75,000 or less, still phased out at $99,000 or less, but there is money that was just announced that they're trying to get added in for the millions of people who either didn't have a spouse with a Social Security number or had other issues where they were denied because they were married and they could not report their income appropriately with two Social Security numbers. So that is a press from the Republicans in the Senate that they just announced literally during our call. I added that in. So there's going to be some, this is not the new $1,200. This is going back to the original April payment to try to catch up those people that got omitted because of the Social Security issue. So they're pushing for that for some of those people. The new one is supposedly going to be identical. My personal frustration with this is this does not help anyone. I don't care whether you made $1 million last year or whether you made $99,100 last year. The problem is if you were fired this year, you're unemployed, whether you are highly paid or not last year based on your tax returns. I think they need to come up with a different way to calculate your eligibility beyond just looking at last year's amount, because last year is no longer a good indicator. So the $1,200 is currently tied to last year's figures. Hopefully that will change and they'll do something based on last quarter, 2 quarters, application for unemployment, whatever the case may be, but they're leaving out a bunch of people. There's a discussion about doing this to also have back-to-school financial assistance. Have not heard a lot of information as to whether that is only school PPE. To Robert's question to the Congressman's Chief of Staff, I don't know whether this is to the school or to the parent, because I think they have two sides they need to look at. One is to the school for PPE, the distance learning, all of the professional education, the things that they need to do, that they're going to have to change their whole model. Some of this is to the parents, because parents have to be able to do this from their home. Parents, an interesting thing that I mentioned this morning to Lyle is I live outside of Fayette County's service area. I don't have internet. I have a dish network only, which is not going to work for my daughter to be able to live stream what she needs to do. Fayette County announced that everyone in Fayette County will be able to get Spectrum at no cost, and they will install, and there will be no build out, there will be no such and such cost. And I'm like, wow, so they're going to bring it the 5 miles out to my house just for me? That's awesome, but I seriously doubt they meant it. But parents have to have their child at home, and there are still families that don't have internet. It may not be a socioeconomic issue, it may be where they physically reside. So that's something that the schools are going to have to take care of, and that's something that they may need additional money to be able to get that done. I don't know whether they're going to do hotspots for children or what they're going to do, but they're talking about it being free for the child to have the ability to have internet access to do their schoolwork at home. So that's something that the federal government's looking at. COVID-19 testing, as we're trying to do more and more testing, they're coming out with making it free over and over again, so that's additionally included. Additional areas that were included originally, but this is why it shut down on Friday. Payroll taxes, there was going to be the elimination of payroll tax, which is a partially paid by the employer, partially paid by the employee, would have benefited both, and it would have encouraged people to go back to work, which is kind of the crux of the debate right now. Is one part just wants unemployment, the other part wants people back at work, and they want to pay them to work. So this would have encouraged people to go back to work, because if you're making $10 an hour, now you're going to make 12 because your 20% that you're carving in, I'm rounding off, please don't send me an email. Whatever it is, you're going to make your amount on top of that, and your employer's going to save that amount because the federal government's not going to collect any payroll taxes. That was shot down. That was something that the Trump administration had said was a deal breaker, but they could not get part of the GOP to agree to that in the Senate, so it's falling apart. Also, although she didn't mention it, there's a discussion about a phase 4.5 prior to phase 5, because unemployment benefits ran out last week. This is not going to be adopted for the next 10 days. I think she's accurate with the August 10th. That's the time frame I'm hearing as well. The problem with that is people are on unemployment right now, and there's no incentive for people to try to do things. It does kickstart them to go back to work, but there aren't that many jobs out there. So it could end up also with work-share ending, and work-share not being there in Kentucky, although there's a debate on that. One of you was gracious enough to share with me that there apparently is work-share. It just depends on which employer you are in the state of Kentucky, and that's very disheartening to hear. I am trying to work with individuals in Kentucky unemployment to try to get that addressed, because it's improper. But there's a lot of confusion right now. So that's the general update. Senate proposed legislative aid packages. This is what she just mentioned. I added this slide because I wanted to put in here the part that I hadn't really heard a lot about, because I was focused on the finance side, not on the liability side. This is really great, because this is, if you've been listening to me the 19 weeks or whatever we've been on here, 17 phases that we've been on here, what did I keep saying? The governor needed to sign a document that said that employers that adhere to the guidelines are immune from a lawsuit. Stroke of the pen, executive order, it's done. He could have done it as part of it. He didn't. What the Senate bill is trying to do is it's talking about a business immunity that would allow businesses that did their job, that clean things up, restaurants, think of them trying to put this together, they find out that someone gets COVID-19, then they have, 10 patrons that want to sue them. If they've done their job to try to keep things clean, they can't be sued if they adhere to the guidelines. I think that is incredibly important, because small businesses are going to get slammed. Labor and employment protections. This is your, I put it down here too, black lung type issue. Basically what they're saying is, if somebody gets COVID-19 while they're working and you did all of the safeguards necessary, and it's going to be difficult to prove whether they got it at work or got it picking up groceries at Kroger or got it getting gas at Costco. This is going to streamline the protections that are available for labor and employment, so that you won't have lawsuits. You will be limited on your workers' comp. You will have a pool of money probably set aside for workers' comp coverage, if there is one, so that employers are not bankrupted by the fact that they had a COVID-19 outbreak. Federalizing personal injury claims, same exact thing. Basically what that does is it provides uniformity to the employers, so that you don't have state laws that are going to give people money based upon any kind of lawsuit that could be filed against you for a COVID exposure, whether it's employees or customers. Requiring gross negligence and willful misconduct. For those that don't know the difference under the law, basically what this is a negligence claim is, if I drive my car down the road and I accidentally run into you, I'm liable for any damage done to you, whether it's personal injury or your car. If you happen to miss work as a result, I'm going to have to pay you, or my insurance is going to pay you. Gross negligence is, I drink a whole bottle of bourbon before I get into the car, and I drive down the road going 100 miles an hour, or I intentionally bet my friend I can probably run this person over. I hit them, that's gross negligence, or willful misconduct, and that's the different standard. If you can prove somebody engages in willful misconduct, that means that they intentionally or willfully engaged in the activity trying to cause an injury. The gross negligence is just like it sounds. Negligence is everyday common, negligence. You just did something wrong. Gross is you just went so far beyond what any person would possibly think was appropriate that it's gross. Kind of that simple. So the law that they're trying to put together will basically say, hey, an employer must engage, or business must engage in gross misconduct, willful misconduct, gross negligence before damage is attached. I think it is incredibly important. I'm really hoping it gets done. I'm really disappointed on a state level that our governor and the government, when it was brought to them, when they did the Healthy at Work officer, and I point blank said to them, this is great, but don't give leniency on, we just want employers to be able to come up with their own officer. I'm like, well, that's fine if you gave them immunity. If you don't give immunity and you say they have to have one, then everybody and their brother is going to be compared to Kroger, and Kroger has a whole lot more money than the mom and pop shop on the corner. That's why I was so concerned. So that's really going to be important. Sunsetting, basically what that's meaning is they're going to run this out over a long period of time, slowly expiring the statute of limitations on this so that people can't spring out a lawsuit 5 years from now, claim that it's COVID related, and try to go after a business after the statute has run the time period of this bill. It's not law yet, but I truly believe that some business protections are going to be built in, and I expect this to be one of them. The finance, I just put it on here because some of this, the way that it was characterized was not the way that I had heard it before. I'm really hoping that the way that Congressman Barr's office has this, since he's on the inside of this, is the right way. PPP round 2 would be great. 300 employees or less is what she said. They're trying to protect the small and not the medium. I think that's excellent. You're probably not going to have to do much of an application. They're going to tie it to your pre-existing application and pay out additional monies on the loan, and you'll basically just click that you agreed to the terms and that you're bound by the same terms. Extending the unemployment, we've talked about that. Enhancing the return to work, that's the extra money on your paycheck. Stimulus package for individuals, we've talked about, and the small business assistance in numerous buckets. She kind of went through that. I don't know that I can flesh out any more than that because I don't really have any other inside information beyond what you heard. So that's the update from Congress. I suspect, and I may have seen it already, some of you, if you're refreshing your pages, you may be laughing at me because Senator McConnell has an announcement at some time today. I thought it was going to be 8:30 this morning or 9. I heard it might be 11. That's why I was refreshing, and that's how I found the Senate announcement that they were going to include some other protections on the people who didn't have Social Security numbers. It's imminent, any second now, and we'll have a lot more information next week once we have this information nailed down as to what this bill is, and once the true battle starts between the two different versions, the House and the Senate. So, all right, a couple of other things. CDC guidelines on quarantine isolation. This is really critically important. It didn't get any press. Thanks, Chase, for sending it out last Friday. On the 26th, the CDC came out, actually, I guess this is brand new last night because they must have updated it last night. But Chase sent it out on Friday in terms of their announcement. Then I pulled it up, and this was actually on there last night from the 26th. So pick whichever date you want. I think it's the same information, but late on Friday, they came out with these new guidelines. The critical part of this is right here. We've all heard 14 days, 14 days, 14 days, and 14 days. CDC came out and said, yeah, let's go with 10 days. They said that they've got scientific support that shows that 10 days is okay. They said that if you've gone 10 days and 24 hours without a fever and your symptoms have improved, not disappeared, then you're free to go out and start being around others. I would be cautious with that because, and I'm not one to like to quote the New York Times, has its own issues, but the New York Times, is the version that they had on Friday showed that the reasoning for this was how difficult it was getting to be to get the second and third test, that people were having to wait extended periods of time to get their test. So they were coming out with new guidelines that basically said if your symptoms are improving, go ahead and go out if you've been 10 days, no fever and symptoms. Not the best guidance I've heard out of them, given the other things that they've said. I'm really surprised to see the CDC say that. I would have thought that the EEOC might say that, some of the others, but the CDC basically doing an about-face on the 14-day is really kind of troublesome to me, because when I hear that it's tied back to the ability to test and not necessarily to the length of time, that's a concern. I have a business acquaintance who he and his wife received or got COVID in February and March, spanning that time period, confirmed, got better, and just found out this week they have COVID the second time. They're in their 50s. So I'm a little concerned with saying get back into the swing of it at 10 days. I think that they were jumping the gun a little bit, and the reasoning for it tied to testing ability instead of to symptomology is a little frightening to me, because CDC shouldn't be on the testing side. They should be on the symptomology side. Just being blunt. The next one they had on there is if you have no symptoms, you can be with others after 10 days have passed since you had your last positive test. You'll notice both of these do not say anything about a follow-up test. That's because they're no longer requiring a follow-up test before you can go back to work, back to school, or to do anything else. The CDC has said that these are merely guidelines. I put MD for short so it would fit. Your treating medical care provider may require an extended isolation period beyond the CDC guidelines, but these are their minimum suggested guidelines. The impact that I see on businesses for this will be substantial. One, we've all heard that 14 days, and we have governors talking about 14 days. Is it 10 or is it 14? If you adhere to the 10 under the CDC, what about the 14? The EEOC has not yet come out with anything that I have seen as of this morning at 8:30, the last time I was able to check. I suspect we'll have an update for you next week from the EEOC adopting the 10-day time period. The problem is, what do you do if someone travels to a hot spot? They're required to self-quarantine for 14 days, yet it now says 10 from an actual positive. So why is it 14 from a hot spot travel? Negative test result. I've had this question asked. It's a real problem. People go to a doctor tests them and says, yep, you're negative. However, I would recommend you stay at home for 14 days just to self-isolate. If you tell a doctor you don't feel well, they're going to tell you you can self-isolate for 14 days without any issue whatsoever. For employers, that's going to be a real problem, because we have a doctor's note policy now under CDC, EEOC, and OSHA saying basically don't press for more information because the doctors are really busy. So now you're going to get all of these notes, and I've literally seen one from one of you on this webinar. Thank you for sending it to me. The note was literally negative COVID-19, self-quarantine 14 days. And the question was, what the heck do we do with this? And the answer is, I guess you let them self-quarantine. I don't guess. You have to let them self-quarantine, because you have a medical care provider notation self-quarantine recommendation that falls under the FFCRA. We talked about it last week, the 6 different things that you can do. One of them was a medical care provider recommending a self-quarantine for whatever the time period. So if you get a doctor's note that says this person is as healthy as an ox but needs to self-quarantine due to COVID-19, you can follow up with the doctor. That is your right. Under ADA, under FMLA, you can follow up to find out why they need to self-quarantine, but then you have the guidance from the CDC saying don't press the doctor because they're really busy with dealing with COVID-19. So I see some real problems with that. I see real confusion going on between the 14-day self-quarantine on hotspot, 14-day isolation directives from governors, local governments, and now a 10-day CDC. Our phases in Kentucky are not being updated monthly, much less weekly or daily, so I have no clue when we can expect to see this from the governor. We had a lot of emergency orders that were issued early on. I thought they were great early on, not necessarily in terms, I'm not political in this, not necessarily in terms of what's in them, because you know how I feel about the healthy at work officer, the fact that there was no guidance given to us, no immunity, no protection from liability. But we had orders coming out every day, and at least we were getting information. That kind of stopped with the first phase that came out, and then the little industry-specific guidelines for doing things. We really haven't gotten much, and I think that it's time for a real step up to the plate and answer questions and address things. This is their opportunity because of the difference between them, but that's where we stand right now. So I've broken this into two things. Don't ask the questions about the schools that's coming next, but I wanted to do these first, and then we'll jump into the clarity, and I use that in quotation marks because there's not a whole lot of clarity, but we'll get into the school issues. So if you want to run through some of the questions, I'll answer some of those now, or we can do them at the end. It's up to you all, but I think we're right on target for timing. So.
Well, we can run through some of the questions that have to do with the things in this segment. So some of these are you continuing to use your crystal ball, I think. We had a question about how you anticipate they will determine what 70% of a person's income is used for unemployment calculations.
So I think that what's going to happen with the 70%, and this is crystal ball, but I think the 70% issue is going to be based upon your state making a determination, because like Kentucky caps it at $552 a week, whether you make $1 million or whether you make whatever that is at, I think they pay 40% of your salary. Don't quote me on that because I'm not up to date on that. Basically what the federal government is going to do is to tell the state, okay, pull your tax records, your payroll records for employees, and we're willing to pay 70%. You use whatever you were going to pay. So hypothetically, if you should have gotten under Kentucky law $552, but under federal law you would get $800. So basically what's going to happen is you'll get the additional $248 from the federal to equal $800. But that would only be 70% of your total weekly salary based upon your previous filings, your employer's previous quarterly payments to the federal government and state government for tax purposes. So I think they're going to do something along those lines to come up with the difference between the state maximum and what the 70% would be. So that's kind of how I think it's going to work.
Okay.
Yeah, all right. Robert Brown had a good question on here. People can't tell their employer, whoops, sorry. I don't know how that went backwards. That's not me. I did it, yes. I don't know how. They can't just tell their employer that they want to stay on unemployment, but you wouldn't believe the number of people that have done that. We talked about that early on. There was a construction crew where everybody literally just walked off the job and went and applied for unemployment. The employer tried to challenge it, tried to file something with the unemployment office saying, I've got work for these people, they're essential personnel, we're in the middle of a construction, and they are not entitled. And they paid them all of the monies that they were, the state went ahead and paid them the $600 plus the whatever they were entitled to under state. So no, they're not able to, but you wouldn't believe the number of people that are doing it. Doesn't seem to matter. They're still getting their unemployment. The state just is not catching up. We still have people who have not gotten it. Last week, you couldn't file for unemployment. You couldn't go in and add to your claim last week. The system was completely shut down. By the time people were able to add yesterday or this morning, their claims were shut down, and now they have to reapply. It's a complete mess, and I don't know if it's ever going to be fixed. So, no, they cannot just say, I want to stay on, but a lot of people are doing it, and it's making it difficult for employers to find qualified employees because they're trying to use COVID-19 as their excuse that they can't come into the office. So that's one. Oh, the PPP, Jane, I'm going to go ahead and answer these quick if I can. Yes, basically what I'm hearing is it's a PPP number 2. Everyone across the country, the amount of people that have applied for the first PPP, it's still available through August the 6th, if I'm not mistaken. So if you haven't done it, hurry up. I don't know how you haven't yet. If you've been watching any of our webinars, go to your bank and apply. It won't take long because everybody and their brother's already gotten their money. So independent contractors, small businesses, 1099s, all of you should be looking into whether you can apply for that, whether you can apply for the EIDL. I don't know whether the EIDL has lifted their agricultural limitation on the second phase, but it's worth looking into. But my understanding is that they're talking about expanding the PPP for those entities that qualified because they paid you for 8 weeks or the 24, but this is going, or you spend it over 24. But this is going beyond that time period, especially for those that expended the 8 weeks when they couldn't even open their doors because they were told spend it or lose it. So the PPP didn't help a lot of people that it was supposed to. So the sick leave together, yeah, we talked about that last week. So basically that question is, do you have to use all of your sick leave together? Now you're seeing employees who are out with symptoms receive a negative test. Yes, they can do that where they are using it. What we talked about was for sick leave under the FFCRA, it can't be intermittent, as in I'm going to be sick today, Wednesday, and Friday. No, I'll be back here tomorrow and Thursday. That's what we meant by intermittent. You can use it if it is over an extended period or truly symptom related. Then the symptoms go away. Then it comes back. Every single time it comes back, the employee is able to use that sick leave until it's expired. So if you're sick, you go get a test, it's negative, then you can go back to work, then you start to feel sick. It's a cycle. I get it. People are scared, and you're also afraid, and the symptom questions you have to ask them when they show up to work. If they don't pass your test to be able to go into work, you have to send them to go get a test, and they're on leave again. So yes, that's not intermittent the way that we talked about it before. They don't have to use 80 hours straight, but they have to use it for the actual purpose of the sick leave, or remember, they can use it for caring for a child who is not able to go to school. And we talked about that last week. Go back and look at those slides as well. So you can use the time period that you're actually sick. You can ask another one because I haven't caught up to the rest of them.
Okay. So I had a question about the return to work money. Again, this is the crystal ball one, but do you foresee that people who have always been working would get the flat rate, or just people returning to work from UI?
I don't have any information on that. I've heard that it's to get people back to work, but that kind of punishes people who have been the backbone of society working all the way through. I don't know how that's going to be. That has not been fleshed out. It hasn't been leaked out. I will say the question about employers paying the extra flat rate, I don't believe that this was going to be an employer additional flat rate. I believe the federal government was going to pay a flat rate to get people to work. So in other words, this was going to be extra money to the employee. I'm not sure how they would get it to the employee. I don't know whether it would be part of the unemployment. Personal comment here. I sure hope it's not, because if they do that in Kentucky and they put it through our unemployment, nobody will ever see the money. That's all I'll say about our unemployment office, but I seriously doubt that it's going to work. But it was not suggested that it would be a the employer would be paying additional money. It was a federal stipend going out to employees to get them back to work instead of to sit at home. 10-day quarantine after a negative test, but the symptoms still persist. If the person still has symptoms, I would require a return to work from the healthcare provider. I'm sorry, that question, just so everybody knows, it was Bill in the chat session. You can take a look at it, but it's basically what are the options when a healthcare provider requires a 10-day quarantine after a negative test, but the employee still has symptoms. Protect yourself, which is to send them back if they answer the questions, because remember, every single day you're supposed to be interviewing every single employee. If they return from an absence and they say, I still have a dry cough, I have no taste, I can't smell anything, and I have a fever of 101, you got to send them back. If they don't have the fever but they have the rest, you've got to make, and this is where the Healthy at Work initiative needed to have the immunity. My concern is, what do you do with someone? And what happens if you have the release because they're symptom-free and they don't have to go back for another test? They come in and then it turns out that it was COVID. They do test positive later on, and now you've exposed everybody at work. I don't have a great answer for you because we didn't get that immunity thing signed, and it should have been. So I don't know how to answer that more clearly than I would send them back. If they've been gone for 10 days and they don't get a new return to work, send them back. If you get a return to work and they have gotten that at the end of their quarantine period and the doctor has said it's not COVID, cautiously bring them back to work, keep them away from people. And remember, we're still under a directive from our governor. If at all possible they can remote work, you are required to allow them to remote work. So there's that. You want to ask another one?
Sure. So we had a question about the recommended 14-day quarantine if traveling to certain states. They wanted to know if that qualifies for the paid sick leave through the FFCRA.
If it is a government initiated, which these are because it's a governor mandated quarantine upon return from a hotspot, if it is identified as a hotspot, or if it is a local health department directive, then you fall under the FFCRA 6 different things that we listed last week that allow you to obtain the FFCRA leave or the sick leave. I'm not sure which one it would fall under. It would kind of depend. If it's the individual himself, I believe that falls under the up to 12 weeks or 2 weeks sick and 10 weeks FFCRA. But if it is a quarantine as a result of a governor's directive, which is returning from a hotspot, then it falls under the governor directive hotspot or governor directive stay-at-home order. The question's becoming, what if you voluntarily, and I bet it's in here, somebody's probably asked this, what if you voluntarily took a vacation to Florida and now you are coming back? Do you get paid the 2 weeks when you come back because of the quarantine hotspot? My answer to you is that's a great question. I have no clue. I don't know, and I'm not being sarcastic. Typically, this was set up to be related to a COVID-19 crisis. If somebody is intentionally, voluntarily exposing themselves to a known risk by going to a known hotspot, why is an employer required to pay that person upon return because now they're under a quarantine order from the governor? I don't have a good answer because I don't believe that, well, I know FFCRA, CARES Act, Phase 2, Phase 3, Phase 3.5, Phase 4, and now whatever they come up with next, maybe the next one will have some of this built in. The other ones never intended for this to last this long. It was supposed to be an extremely limited pool of people that could use the COVID-19 12 weeks off. Those are going to be your deathly ill people, because the rest of us were going to be working. We weren't going to be on shutdown orders. This is uncharted territory. I don't like to use that phrase, or unprecedented, or the new normal, and whatever. I don't like those, but I don't have an answer, because this has never, ever been done before, and the laws are set up, all laws are set up for lawyers to figure out ways around the laws. That's what we do. This one is set up for lawyers and their clients and individuals to figure out these really cool little nifty ways to get paid to do nothing. And I see this as being a real problem, again, because there is no guidance on this at all. And so you go to Florida, you go to New York, you go to California, and you come back, and now you're under a quarantine order. Do you get paid for it? My gut tells me, my fairness gut tells me, no, you don't get paid. We fire the person, or we tell them work from home, but or whatever, but I'm not paying you. You went on vacation to a known hotspot. I'm not going to pay you for that. The statute says they're under a quarantine order from the governor. It doesn't say, is this because they intentionally exposed themselves to a known risk? Statute doesn't say that. So you've got a dichotomy between the two different types of statutes out there, and there's not a lot of guidance for you, and I apologize. I can't help you when I don't know what is in there. Yeah, let's see. Go ahead with your next one. Or do you want me to?
I was just going to ask, we had a couple people send messages to ask, is the 14-day quarantine currently a request by the governor or an order? The 14-day quarantine following a hotspot trip.
It was at one point a mandate. I'm not positive. Please don't quote me on it, because I didn't pull it to see the precise language. I know it's at the governor's website on COVID-19, KY COVID-19 at ky.gov, I believe. I apologize. I should know that, and it's just been a little while. I'm going to look that up while I'm going on to the next slides, just so that I can try to answer that. But let's come back to that. I'll see what I can do. I can't promise you anything, but I will try to look at that.
Got some slides to cover.
Yeah, I've got some on Kentucky, back to school, so we could do those real quick and then bounce back to these.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Well, we thought a couple of weeks ago this was going to be the hot issue. Well, it's sort of a hot issue, but this other stuff kind of crept in front of it.
Yep.
But we're finally getting announcements, so let's hear about it.
Yeah, so here's the back to school clarity. I've got some clarity. I don't have some clarity. I've got a lot of murkiness, and some basically, hey, let's just wait a month or two and we'll let you know more in September or October. So here we go. Fayette County announced the NTI 2DL, because I think that sounds cool. That's what they said, not me. I'm sorry. Not I said that. They said it, not me. Non-traditional instruction, which is NTI. 2DL, I guess, came from the 2 Ds and then the L. Again, this is not me. Differentiated distance learning, because when they tried it in the spring, it wasn't differentiated. It was just distance learning, and it didn't go well. A lot of complaints, so this time they said, we're going to rename it, and we're going to do better. I don't know whether they're going to do better or not, but they announced it starting August 24th. At least that's the last I heard. They've been bouncing around with possibly pushing that back. Additional information to be provided after today's board meeting. That meeting is, I think, happening simultaneously starting at noon. It may be later this afternoon, but they said they would be updating us on additional things this afternoon. Jefferson County. They just called theirs NTI, non-traditional instruction. They didn't go with any cool dashes or 2DLs or anything. Theirs starts on the 25th, which I think is a Tuesday, for a 6-week period. Fayette County's basically said we'll reconsider sometime in September. They didn't give us a date. Jefferson says we are doing a 6-week interim non-traditional instruction, i.e. remote learning. 6 weeks we will reevaluate and have a new announcement. Covington, you'll see why I did this on the next slide. Covington, starting September 1st, not in August, they bumped theirs back. 2 days per week in person, 1 day planning, which is Wednesday, and 2 days at home. It is, one team is a Monday, Thursday, the one is a Tuesday, Friday, and the other is Wednesday. Everyone has a planning day. So theirs is mandatory, 1 day at home, 1 day at work or school, and 1 day, actually 3 days at home, 2 days at school. The 1 day is a planning day. And it said for teachers, so I don't know whether they're just giving students a day off on Wednesday every single week or whether that's homework day. Haven't really told. Scott County and Warren County, the only difference is the date of starting school. They're going to have in-school education. They're also giving you an option of having your child stay at home, and you can even pick up, at least in Scott County, pick up your breakfast and lunch for your child every day and take it home to your child so that they can eat at home. I think in response to the concern about a lot of students not having hot meals at home, they're allowing that package delivery every day. So those are your options. All schools providing an option for, is what they should have said, for traditional learning. They all adopted the Healthiest School Directive provided by the governor's office. They kind of had to because it's a mandate. They did it in different ways. Basically, though, what this is what we talked about last week: temperature checks, masks, social distancing, and when you're loading the bus, everyone must move to the back. No one can sit behind the school bus driver. You have to sit with your siblings. You can't sit with anyone else, so on and so forth. The only exception is masks are not to be worn by kindergarten and first grade, basically because they won't wear the mask. Those are the only issues, and that's the update. So the employer decisions related to the school-based decisions, Fayette County, Jefferson County. I put these in parens after them. In other words, for any other school district that adopts this, check your local school district for where your employees are, because they're going to fall into one of these three. I picked basically the 5 biggest school districts. No, I didn't do it scientifically, so if I messed up and didn't pick yours and yours is the biggest, don't send me an email. I apologize. I just picked these because once I had these, they kind of fit everything. I didn't really need to go further. 1, mandatory distance learning. 2, partial mandatory distance and partial in person. And 3, we're going to give you an option. Those are the 3 things we talked about last week. If you fall within Jefferson or Fayette, that's mandatory distance learning. Because it's mandatory, employers must follow the FFCRA and the sick leave. Covington County, or mandatory partial and partial distance, partial in person. Because it's a mandatory split by the school district, employers must allow employees to utilize intermittent FFCRA and sick leave to properly care for their children on any day that the school is not open or that the school is mandating distance learning. Why? Because the school is not open, and that's what the FFCRA breaks it down. The third one is the critical one that I'm concerned about. Scott County is a big employer area. Warren County is as well, and several other schools may think they're doing a great thing to open the schools, but protect the parents by allowing them to have an option to homeschool. This is a big issue for employers because, as we talked about last week, anyone who's given an option is not dealing with a closed school. Anyone that's been given an option is not dealing with a situation where the school is forcing them to distance learn. If you have employees and they voluntarily select the option to homeschool their child. They do not fall then under the FFCRA, the 6 things we talked about. I don't have the slide to put back up. I put it up like 3 weeks in a row. But we talked about the fact that if you have a mandatory closing, you then get to use FFCRA 2/3 of your salary. The calculations are on the previous one. Go back and check those out. But you can't use it if your school is not closed. The problem here is Scott County and Warren County are not closing their schools at all. They are going to be open. They're giving parents an option. That means that you then can't declare that the school is closed and you're paying them so that you can then submit that to the federal government for dollar. I'm not telling you as a conscientious employer that you can't pay your employees. You can't say, yeah, okay, we'll go ahead and keep doing that. What I'm telling you is they may not fall under the federal where they said the intent of the CARES Act and the FFCRA, you were supposed to get a dollar-for-dollar recoupment of paying your employees to stay at home. You can't do that if you don't qualify. You don't qualify if the schools are open. So the schools giving an option think that they're doing something beneficial. They're really not. That creates problems for the employer and for the unwitting employer and for the employee who believes that they can now stay at home, get paid under the FFCRA. Those are the issues. So any employer faced with employees, I know I said this last week, I know I said it the week before. If you're faced with employees who are facing these issues, you need to discuss it with them because you don't want a surprise. Your employees can't handle a surprise, and employees need to be careful. Any jurisdiction that's offering you an option, you need to inform your employees until we get further guidance from the, at this point, I guess, just from the Senate and the House on the next bill. Employees who select to keep their child at home instead of being forced to keep their child at home are going to be facing some real issues. It could go away. It could be interpreted a different way, but if you read the letter of it, it literally says school's closed. Your school's not closed if you pick to stay at home. So I don't know if that's why Fayette did what they did. I kind of was hoping Fayette would follow the Covington model. I think children need some in-person, and the other thing is some parents cannot homeschool their child. So how are parents going to do that if they have to keep their job? You're now forcing a parent to select between a job and a child. And it's going to be really sad because some of them are going to run out of their FFCRA time pretty quickly here, and then they will be left without a job, or the child will be left unattended, or the child will basically not have any training at all and be left unattended. So there's some unfortunate ramifications people haven't thought about that are going to be a problem. So that's where we are. Now on with any of the other questions. And I left 15 minutes for questions. I think I did it perfectly.
Well, good. So we had one question that just asked, would you pay 2/3 wages from the FFCRA to cover child care schedule adjustments if an employee came back to work and couldn't work their standard schedule? Or would it be easier to adjust their schedule if it's possible to get there 40 hours? It seems to me that either one would work as long as the employer could work it out with the employee, but you may have some additional thoughts on that.
Yeah, 2 things on that. One, you're getting into a whole lot of individual specific employer-employee relations, HR, and legal. I will say that, so I'm going to put my little caveat out there. So you may need additional legal guidance or HR guidance, which we're not designed to give on this webinar to everybody for individual questions. It's why sometimes we can't answer those. But typically speaking, you can't round off to get them to the 40 hours just by saying, well, we'll fill in the time and the gap. But hypothetically, If the person needs to drop their child off at school by 9:30 and they can't start until after they drop their child off at school, or they have to pick their child up at 3 o'clock because there's no bus service due to COVID-19, all of this has to be due to COVID-19. So you need documentation from the school district. You need information from the employee. You're going to have to verify it as an HR professional. But if they meet the criteria for COVID-19, then that difference in their schedule can be paid for the 2/3, or they can claim, I don't want to say they can, again, this gets so deep into the legal analysis. Hypothetically, they could possibly be able to fall under the sick leave for the first 2 weeks if they meet that criteria for caring for a child who can't attend a school due to COVID-19. You'd really have, that's getting really close to all the fine nuances of each individual employee, but there are ways for you to pay them. I would suggest that you sit down with a calendar, map out what it is, what times they need to be there, and you're really going to have to do that on like the Covington model. Going back to that, just so everybody knows what we're talking about. The Covington model, if it's a partial ordered in person and ordered partial distance, you're going to have to really work with your employees and understand your employees that are off on Tuesday and Thursday or on Monday and Wednesday, and you can't force them to pick. If the school's told them if your alphabet starts A through M, then you Monday and Thursday. If it's N through Z, you go Tuesday and Friday, and nobody goes on Wednesday, you're going to be stuck with whatever the school tells them. But you can sit down with your employees and walk through with them to make sure that they get their 2/3 to cover picking up and dropping off, as long as it is COVID related. If they have a bus service and the person's volunteering to take their child to school, that's not COVID-19. They're volunteering just like they're volunteering to homeschool. So if there's a bus, let's say the one that I didn't find because nobody has done it, and I think it's because they can't clean it that often, is half the students go in the morning, half the students go in the afternoon. That's going to be a nightmare for parents that have to drive their child to school. If, however, the schools figure out a way to bus your child to and from school half days, you can't get the time for busing, but you may get the time for having to go home to be there when your child gets there if you have no alternative care. So you can't get the time to go pick them up from school if there's a bus, but then once that child would typically get off the bus, you can get the time from the time they get off the bus until the end of the school day. The end of the work day. Again, that's why I said this is so individual, so legalistic and HR specific. You will really need to sit down with an HR professional, map out what each school system's requiring for your employees, what each individual has. Do they live inside of that particular school's district, or are they having to drive their child to school for like a magnet situation? Some of those don't allow buses. My child, they don't pick up my child. I have to drive her to her school. You may have that situation. If that's the case, that person gets paid their leave to drive their child to school because it's a mandatory no bus taking them to and from the school. It depends on every single individual employee. That's why it's hard to give blanket advice with individual situations. I see the announcement from Jane. I'd heard that as well. The announcement for everybody is the Washington Post is saying the GOP will cut the $600 free federal additional assistance to $200 for the time being. I'd heard that, and that's the phase 4.5 or whatever phase we're in. I'm not really sure now. Where basically this is a Band-Aid until they can come out with the new ones so that people continue to get some kind of money if they're on unemployment. I think that that's not going to be accepted. I think it's going to end up being more likely to be $250 to $400. That's the number I've heard as well. The newly proposed benefits, when they'll expire, that was from Jane as well. I don't even know when they're going to go into effect. I don't know that anybody has identified the time period. I think they're hoping that this new federal benefit will be if I were a betting man, which I am, but on this, I would say September 30th is what they're looking at, because they don't want the free money to just continue. But I would say September 30th or October 31st, and maybe this time they'll be smart enough to pick a Sunday and not go by the month end, so that they end up with this thing where none of the states have money ending on Wednesday or Thursday of a week, and so they pick July 31st and it meant absolutely nothing to anybody. So I don't know what they're going to do, but they'll probably pick a Friday, a Saturday, or a Sunday so that they can mesh that a little better. All right, next.
Okay, so we've got a question. What if employers won't let people who can work from home do so? The leadership in this person's company says they don't like work from home.
So that's a really good, interesting question, and it brings into line some of the issues that people have had with the governor's mandates. The governor has entered executive orders. I never went into detail about the last one, but I think that it's important to understand. Evans Orchard filed a lawsuit against the governor. The Attorney General Cameron joined Evans Orchard in challenging the governor's mandate, because it basically said you can't have a business have more than 10 at the time, then 50, now we're back, then 100, now we're back to 10. Didn't matter how big your business was. The problem with that was, agricultural-wise, they're dealing with a situation where they could have 2,000 acres. 10 people on 2,000 acres is a little bit absurd. So agribusiness was like, wait a minute, we've got vineyards out here with 2,000 acres, and you're telling us we can't have 10 people on site at a time? That's killing our business. We're sitting on 2,000 acres. And these people could social distance having 200 acres apiece, and yet you won't let us do it. That's the reason why it was declared to be invalid. Then the Supreme Court said, we're going to fix this so we don't have 120 different circuit court orders. So we're setting it aside temporarily, not setting aside his order, setting aside the temporary restraining order that set aside his executive order. This is the same issue. The problem becomes he's entered an order that says everyone work from home. That's never been lifted. If you can work from home, continue to work from home. I don't know that that's valid, because employers have a right as a free enterprise to come up with their own business model. They could be looking at their statistics and realizing that their people working from home are sleeping in until noon, eating their lunch until 4, checking their messages between 4 and 4:15, and going out and sitting outside until 5 o'clock, and that's their day. And if that employer doesn't want to pay people to stay at home because they don't believe that they're getting the work quality out of them, as a private institution that is not government controlled, and this is where you're getting a lot of the pushback between business and government, you've got a government saying you must allow them to work from home, and you've got an employer saying you're not paying their bills. The employer's having to pay the payroll and the taxes and run the business. If they fire them because they won't work, then they, under the executive order, they could have a lawsuit. It's a really sticky issue because there's a separation between private businesses and and government-controlled entities. The governor mandating how a private business runs its business is really dangerous. If it's done solely for health concerns, obviously, if you run a dirty restaurant and you come in and the government says, we've inspected and you have rats running across and roaches and so on, we're shutting you down, that helps the public health. That's the concept of what you have here as well, is the governor saying, well, we don't want people coming in if they don't have to. The problem is that now, after 2.5 months, because he entered that at the beginning of May, we've had very little, if any, guidance between then and now. Employers have a right to require their people to work the way they want them to work. And whether you could remotely work from your computer does not equate to an employer saying, I need this person in my office for the following reasons. I will say this. If the employer can come up with something that and I'm not suggesting you make up something that's not valid, but hypothetically speaking, construction workers can't work from home because they have to build things. They can't do it from home. They have to be on site. If an employer can come up with a legal policy that identifies what employees must do in the office, and it's something that cannot be done remotely, if you can fashion something that passes muster as a legitimate business thing, you can get around this. Otherwise, this is one of the things that we've been saying to the governor, we really need additional guidance. You can't just pass it and 2.5 months later it's still law. That's where we are right now. So it's a problem. It's not just that the ownership says we just prefer to have things done that way. The reality is that there are times where additional work gets done at an office setting that can't be done efficiently at home. And so there's a serious issue there. And the problem is, can you be sued for not following an executive order when there are serious questions as to whether the executive order is actually even a constitutional order? Can a government mandate that an employer only run its business in a certain way when an employer doesn't want to run its business that way? Can an employer then fire somebody for not following what the employer wants to do when there's a governor mandate that says you don't have to do it that way? Again, very serious constitutional and legal issues, and that's where you see me list like 4 or 5 times. I see a whole lot of lawsuits coming out of COVID-19 for a variety of reasons, and this is one of them. I think you're going to see some lawsuits coming out of a governor mandate and whether people actually followed it or not. While we're answering any other questions, we got a few other minutes. I am going to fast forward, if that's okay, Lyle, to the end so that people can add their SHRM and HRCI codes, and I'll still answer whatever questions you guys want to throw at me.
Yeah, thank you, Jim.
Okay, so we've got, so our office-based business is still only allowed to have 50% capacity. Has he ever changed that order?
I don't believe he did change that order. I think that we are still in the 50% capacity, if I'm not mistaken. And anybody in the chat, if you see that otherwise, throw it out there. But I think we're at the 50% capacity. If anything, I think he backed off of everything he was doing. So I don't see anything in his announcements. I do see where he reduced it back to 10 people. He announced a new travel advisory that recommends a 14-day self-quarantine, so that's your answer. It is not a mandatory, it is a recommendation, but I could see that still being used under FFCRA. Be careful, just take a look at that to verify.
And then we had a question, if an employee elects to keep a child at home for school and therefore they do not qualify for the FFCRA, if the school then eventually closes, does this convert them back to being eligible?
If they're still employed, so if you allow them leave and it's unpaid leave hypothetically, and then the school announces a closure and they're on unpaid leave, then they could become part of the paid leave, because as soon as that becomes an order, then they qualify. So basically it's a triggering, this whole thing until it's cleaned up, if it's cleaned up by the Congress, is a triggering event caused by the school, not by, that's basically what I've been trying to tell, what I've been trying to explain is it's a school forced closure, school forced distance learning. Those people get coverage. If it's a voluntary, you don't get coverage because you weren't forced. If subsequently you get forced, then you get paid. That's the gist of it. And I see 21 messages. I hope we've covered some of these. Keep rolling through them if you want. I'll stay as long as we need to answer. If Lyle's okay with that, because that's a lot of questions.
Yeah,
We've gotten to a lot of them. Allison?
Yeah, we had a private question about quarantining and whether or not it would qualify for FFCRA due to surgery. So we have a lot of employees who have been testing for COVID before a surgery, maybe 2 or 3 days, and then their doctor requires them to quarantine until the surgery. Would that be covered by FFCRA since the doctor requires it?
Yeah, I would, a recommendation to the doctor, meaning tell the employee to have the doctor do this if you happen to know ahead of time. Have the doctor put in there that they are requesting or requiring self-quarantine for the upcoming surgery due to COVID-19. As long as they put due to COVID-19, that's your golden ticket as an HR professional, because the quarantine due to COVID-19 opens the door to the FFCRA protection. So I see a lot of the comments in here was that wasn't advisory. I just wanted to verify before I said it. I didn't want to say it wrong. And the in-person schools, private in Lexington, starting August the 12th, the concern, or that's not a concern with regard to FFCRA. It would be if somebody insists that their child attend a private school and they are going to self-impose a non-traditional instruction, because I think some of those private schools are talking about if a child has a particular, or a parent has a particular concern, they will allow that parent or child to have a different way of handling that. So, okay, sorry. So that's, I will say this, it could be a one-off for a parent who actually has COVID or gets a doctor's note. So I'm going to throw a real monkey wrench into this. What if schools are open in person? Let's use a private school that Meredith threw out there. A parent gets a doctor's note saying their child can't go to school because the parent is immunocompromised, a grandparent that lives at home is immunocompromised, or the child themselves is immunocompromised, and they insist on them allowing them to participate by Zoom or some other non-traditional. In that instance, what is the employer supposed to do? I'll tell you the answer. It's kind of weird, and I hadn't thought about that until right now. On each individual doctor note, they would fall under the FFCRA doctor-recommended quarantine. They're no longer school. It's no longer 2/3. It's a quarantine recommended by the doctor for the parent or for the child not to go to school due to the parent. That's going to throw a whole lot of confusion in, and I could see that needing to have legal guidance on, look, do we pay the 2/3 or do we pay the full? It's to care for the child, but the doctor's notes because the parent has cancer or the parent is immunocompromised, the child can't then go to a regular setting. In that instance, I could argue both sides. You better make sure that it's written very well. I would suggest that it's probably a full and not a 2/3, because that's related to the parent's health, and I think that you're going to have a situation where the child's allowed to Zoom participate in an in-person setting due to the parent's potential exposure to COVID-19. That'll be the next issue for these schools, is even though you have in-person, you're going to be forced to have a one-off, and I really haven't thought through that, but it just dawned on me. My daughter brought me a message about something else, and that triggered to me. You're going to have a really big issue with people who are going to have additional doctor-related notes for their child that can't go to school as a result of a doctor's note. Keep that in mind. We'll cover that more, because I think that's a big area we're going to have to cover next.
Okay. And we've got one that's maybe a little too in the weeds, but I'll throw it out there just in case. Due to the amount of work that needs to be completed, We are looking to implement a bonus program that is based on hours worked. Can we exclude hours used for basically FFCRA or EFMLA?
I think that's really too far in the weeds. I will tell you basically the one thing, I haven't researched that. Obviously, I'm doing this on the fly because we haven't even talked about it, but I do specifically recall tips, overtime, and bonuses were required to be considered as part of the pay to employees taking FFCRA. So with that kind of backdrop from the Congress, I seriously doubt that they would allow you to then incentivize under the existing model, not the new phase. I seriously doubt that they will be able to incentivize bonus hours coming back and not giving any for people caring for someone, because then that's basically discrimination.
Great. And then I sent over 2 questions to you if you, all right, if you don't think they're too in the weeds. Otherwise, I think I've hit most of them.
Have I seen employers make accommodations on unpaid time off? The answer is yes. That's the compassionate employer. It just wouldn't be under FFCRA. It's like any of your other leave policies. You could do it unpaid if you wanted. There won't be any punishment to you, obviously. You just can't submit it as FFCRA. Yeah, so that's, if they can't work virtually, can they just take unpaid leave? The answer is yes. Just like anything else, if they had exhausted their sick leave, you can do that. Can you change their schedules to fit? Absolutely. You heard me talk about attorneys, doctors' offices, everything else. I think you're going to see a lot of people go to 3 shifts so that they can manipulate things overnight. A way to get out of paying FFCRA, or for your employees that exhaust, is to allow them to work 2nd shift, 3rd shift, different shifts based upon husband and wife, all those different kinds of things. I think we covered them all.
I think so. Awesome.
8 minutes over.
Impressive.
Well, thank you guys, and thanks to everybody that stayed on with us all this time. We really appreciate it. And I think there'll be more to cover next Monday. What do you all think?
I think we'll have 2 hours next Monday because of the schools and the new, whatever this bill is. I think you all need to come back. It's going to be a lot of stuff to cover.
And if people come up with questions during the week and want to fire them over to us, please do. We love digging in and trying to find answers. Allison, I see a lot of stuff's jumping around on here. I guess
Let's just say thanks.
All right. Hey, everybody have a great week. Stay COVID free. Let us know if we can help in any way. And we look forward to catching up next week. We are still running our Wednesday special Zoom meeting on how to find a job during a pandemic. And the audience keeps growing on that. It's the same time, 11 to 12:30, not quite as long. And we'd love to have people join us. If you know people that are struggling to find a job now, I think they'll find it helpful. That's the scoop today. Thank you, Jim, very much. Everyone, have a great day.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Have a great day, everybody.